The main conflicts of the Star Wars galaxy have fascinated fans for decades, and have been thoroughly fleshed out in many ways, especially the Galactic Civil War and the Clone Wars in both canon and legends. But I think one that nobody really talks about stands above the rest in terms of pure political and situational interest. Emperor Rowan Fel, descendant of Han and Leia, leads his Imperial loyalist forces on the run from the rest of his former forces, now under control of the reborn Sith. The Galactic Alliance is on the run as well, now just a remnant, all but defeated by the Sith and Empire. Luke Skywalker's new Jedi Order has moved completely underground after the Sith struck back. But how did this happen? Well, this is the outcome of the Sith-Imperial War, what I consider to be the most interesting conflict in the history of the galaxy far, far away. Like all historical conflicts, the roots of the Sith-Imperial War and its following conflicts go back years, over 100 in this case. The Sith-Imperial War would not have happened without the biggest conflict in galactic history, and the most major expanded universe conflict, the Yuuzhan Vong War. In 25 ABY, the Yuuzhan Vong, an intergalactic species who hate technology and only use biological creations, invade the galaxy, giving our heroes and their families the challenge of a lifetime. The Vong devastated the galaxy and forced the New Republic to reorganize into the Galactic Alliance. Having captured Coruscant, these invaders did something called Vong forming, which was the process of Yuuzhan Vong bioengineers turning barren or technological spaces into lush, plant-filled paradises. But 4 years and trillions of dead later, over the conquered and Vong-formed Coruscant, the Yuuzhan Vong were officially defeated. But the warlike species, detached from the Force for thousands of years, was spared by the Jedi, secluded onto the living planet of Zonoma Sikat. Still, the galaxy was reeling, and the impacts of this war would last over a century into the future and beyond. After the Yuuzhan Vong War, there were other conflicts like the Dark Nest Crisis and the Second Galactic Civil War that also built a strange new galaxy. After the Dark Nest Crisis awakened it within him, Jacen Solo, son of Han and Leia, fell to the dark side under the tutelage of the Sith Dark Lady Lumaya. This led to the aforementioned Second Galactic Civil War and his death, and eventually his twin sister, Jaina Solo, marrying Jagged Fel, heir to the Imperial remnant. Together, Jaina and Jag began a Solo Fel dynasty in charge of the new empire. After the return of Abeloth and some other adventures, the galaxy fell into an uneasy peace. A new status quo amongst the Galactic Alliance, Fel Empire, Chiss Ascendancy, Yuuzhan Vong remnants, and other smaller factions. As far as we know, this lasted for decades, until the consequential year 122 ABY. At this time, Jedi Master Cole Skywalker, descendant of Luke Skywalker and Mara Jade, was a humble Jedi Master, preferring to train at the remote Ossus Temple as opposed to the formal and admittedly shiny Coruscant Temple. Cole was a friend to the remnants of the Yuuzhan Vong, which would have certainly made Luke proud, and Cole came up with the idea for something that would later be known as the Ossus Project. Hundreds of planets across the galaxy were still devastated by the Yuuzhan Vong's invasion, and the Ossus Project was the idea of using Yuuzhan Vong biotechnologies to rejuvenate the natural environments of the planets, making them much more livable and prosperous. Testing the process on a barren region of Ossus with the shaper Ne Rin, it worked, and Cole was pleased. It became sensational news, and countless other Alliance member worlds wanted Vong forming done on their world. But just sectors away, on the lost Sith homeworld of Korriban, something was brewing. Darth Krayt, formerly Jedi Knight Asherad Het, had been building up his strength since being captured by the Yuuzhan Vong decades earlier. Having learned the ways of the Sith, Krayt had started a new order on Korriban, the One Sith. And from far away, the One Sith and its allies corrupted the Ossus Project. All part of Krayt's plan, through Sith alchemy, the Vong forming became dark, rotted, painful. What was once paradise, a promise of a new future for ravaged worlds, became plagues, violent creatures and plants, and terrifying reminders of Yuuzhan Vong bioweapons from a century earlier. What should have been a moment of healing as the Vong used their unique abilities and technology to repair a wound they'd caused, physically and metaphorically burying the hatchet, had become a horrific moment for the Vong, the Jedi, and the Galactic Alliance on the whole. The galaxy's painful memories were still there, and the general public still held a deserved grudge against the Vong, especially those within the Empire. But now, they had a manufactured excuse to hate them again. painting the Jedi and the alliance that supported them with the same brush. The Fel Empire was a different kind of empire than Palpatine's. Led by Emperor Rowan Fel, the seat of Emperor was a dynastic one, handed down to familial heirs. But ever since the time of the Kamas document crisis in 19 ABY, the Empire's main remnant was also governed largely by the Moff Council, which is exactly what that sounds like. Rowan Fel and his Imperial Jedi Knights followed the light side of the Force as much as they could, still being authoritarians. They followed the, quote, victory without war doctrine, Imperial missions across the galaxy, helping out locals while also offering them work that directly funneled into the Empire's service, often the military, which was technologically very advanced, and while more diverse, was still a fascistic stormtrooper army. By the time of the Ossus Project, the Moff Council was led by Grand Admiral Morlish Veed, who was quick to call the project a secret Yuuzhan Vong plot, treating it as an act of war against the galaxy, banking off of the generations of anti-Vong sentiment the Jedi were trying to heal. The idea that the whole thing was a Vong trick made the Galactic Alliance look incredibly weak due to their association with the Jedi, and led the Moff Council to declare war on the Galactic Alliance, even though Emperor Rowan Fel wasn't fully on board. And due to the unpopularity of the Alliance, many worlds seceded over the course of the war, joining up with the Fel Empire as it began to grow amidst the conflict and chaos. Despite the Jedi's involvement, the technologically advanced Fel Empire began to gain the upper hand in the war. The Empire had victories across the board, with the Galactic Alliance almost more likely than not to be on the back foot. But the Alliance wasn't giving up without quite the fight. And given the Alliance's decentralized nature, there were battles fought via different proxy factions aligned with them, like the Mandalorians during the Battle of Bodiaf, which is significant as Mandalorian forces had been building up over this period of time and could have been a serious boon to the GA. The Mandalore at the time, Chernin Ordo, was hired by the Galactic Alliance to fight off and delay Imperial forces, before being eliminated by one of his comrades, who was also paid off to keep the Mandalorians out of the war. But 1 year into the war, everything changed. 1 year after the declaration of war, the One Sith revealed themselves to Imperial Intelligence Director Nina Calixt. The Sith offered their aid in the conflict, and Calixt brought the offer to the corrupt and war-hungry Moff Council, who eagerly accepted at the thought of even more voracious conquest. The more so morally inclined and peaceful Emperor Fel was not a fan of this alignment, but deferred to the choices of the Moff Council, going along with their decisions and accepting the aid that the Dark Sorcerers offered, all while keeping the Imperial Knights out of the conflict completely. Over the course of the rest of the war, Fel ruled over the ever-expanding Empire from the heavily fortified and historic Imperial throne world of Bastion, guarded by his knights. Countless Sith Lords, all decorated with Sith tattoos from head to toe, joined Imperial forces after this alliance was made. They led separately from the formal military structure of the Empire, much like Darth Vader did under Palpatine's Empire. They could promote, execute, and command their forces following the will of Krayt, and were even sometimes in charge of entire fleets or sectors, ruthlessly commanding the Empire's forces against the floundering Galactic Alliance. The Alliance, whose collectively pooled military has changed a lot from the New Republic days of numbered fleets, is stretched further and further, with more strategic military support losses until the legendary Battle of Kamas in 130 ABY. Alliance forces were tipped off that a meeting between the Chiss, Hapens, and Rowan Fel would be happening at Kamas, and some of their ruling triumvirate wished to ambush this meeting with the strong core fleet and capture Fel, while others in the Alliance, like Admiral Gar Stasi and Jedi representative Cole Skywalker, were against this choice, Skywalker sensing a trap. Nonetheless, the plan went through, and Alliance forces were on the move. But as the Jedi were lured away due to a minor attack intended to do so at Coruscant, Alliance forces arrived at Kamas. The tip was indeed intentional and false, and the battle had begun. This final confrontation between Alliance and Sith Imperial forces became disastrous for the Galactic Alliance, with the Imperial forces declaring victory as the Alliance's Admiral Patan accepted Grand Admiral Veed's terms of surrender. Gar Stasi, though ever the rebel, and against the battle in the first place, refuses to surrender, broadcasting fleet-wide letting all Alliance personnel know that if they were, quote, disinclined to surrender, they should join up with him. After some brief moments of confusion on both sides, what would become Admiral Stasi's Galactic Alliance remnant fleet fled the scene along lesser-known hyperspace lanes. At this point, the majority of the Alliance's forces formally surrendered to the Empire, but for now, there was a glimmer of hope in what was practically a new rebellion led by Gar Stasi. Hearing about the battle's conclusion, Emperor Rowan Fel, who was not pleased with the war overall, furiously threatened Moff Calixt for starting the war and involving the Sith in all of this. Coruscant, now undefended by the Alliance core fleet, quickly fell into Imperial hands. During this complicated change of power, the Jedi Temple on Coruscant also fell. While most of the Jedi evacuated to the training temple on Ossus, Fel moved the Imperial throne to Coruscant as the Alliance went into exile. The Galactic Alliance remnant now began covert and rebellious strikes against the new Empire, which now controlled the majority of the galaxy. Realizing this full control, agents of the Empire soon after launched an incredibly deadly, Sith-led massacre at the Jedi Temple at Ossus. This was the beginning of a brand new Jedi purge across the galaxy, Sith openly scouring planets for any remaining Jedi to eliminate, all of which led to the deaths of the majority of the new Jedi Order's members. Jedi Master Cole Skywalker made a legendary final stand at Ossus, dying on the temple steps as his son Cade escaped in a shuttle full of Jedi. This is the panel of that event happening. You see, I can actually pull it from the comic instead of using an AI-generated version for a thumbnail, but that's just me. Meanwhile, having recently arrived on Coruscant, Rowan Fel was scheduled to meet with the Moff Council to discuss the logistics of the transfer of power from Bastion to Coruscant. But during this fateful meeting, Darth Krayt and his highest Sith Lords entered unannounced, the Dark Lord pulling his lightsaber on Emperor Fel. The Imperial Knights stepped in to do their highest duty, defending the Emperor, and a battle began. Krayt was easily victorious and slew Rowan Fel, taking his throne as the new Sith Emperor. But wait. Plot twist, this was not the real Rowan Fel. Rowan Fel and some of his knights were tipped off shortly before the meeting that this Sith assassination would be attempted. So the Rowan Fel that was in the meeting was actually a body double. Starting at this moment, the real Emperor Fel and his small group of loyalist forces are now on the run, dodging Krayt's new Sith Empire wherever they can, while the Galactic Alliance remnant, a rebellion under the command of Gar Stasi, is causing organized chaos among Sith Imperial ranks. The Jedi are in hiding, many retreating to the hidden temple on Tyvis, while all are being hunted down by a Sith order that's more visible as Dark Lords than in any other galactic government for over 1,000 years. The galaxy is once more completely ruled by the Sith, under the ruthless fist of Darth Krayt. But the war is just beginning. While Darth Krayt is in command of the vast majority of Imperial forces, over the course of the next 7 years, many groups, battalions, and legions grew tired of the cruelty of Krayt and his Sith, defecting to Fel's side. Over these years, Fel's Empire in exile grew more and more as the Second Imperial Civil War began. Fel loyalist Imperials fighting on the battlefield with Krayt loyalist Imperials, the Galactic Alliance stuck in the middle. In 137 ABY, as the war rages in pockets of the galaxy's north, Rowan Fel and his Imperials make a big move. Having covertly rotated loyalists into service on the stronghold planet Bastion, Fel arrives to take the planet back from Krayt's empire. While he's questioned by a lieutenant upon landing, Fel gives a speech about proclaiming his birthright to rule Bastion and the Empire, as the surrounding stormtroopers bow. The lieutenant pulls a blaster and a stormtrooper kills him, loyal to the true Emperor, like the rest of the 501st, now stationed on Bastion. Rowan Fel's Empire in Exile now has a home base, and a way to justify their power as a true challenger to Darth Krayt. But as this victory is won, news comes in that the Imperial mission on Socorro is burning, and the princess, Rowan's daughter, Marasiya Fel, is missing. This is where the journey of Jedi turned bounty hunter turned Jedi Cade Skywalker and the story of Star Wars legacy truly begins, and is, in my opinion, the end of the most interesting and complex conflict and series of events in the history of Star Wars lore. Following this, alliances shift even more, and Darth Krayt is challenged for the throne. But I don't want to spoil that for you all. I love the Legacy comics despite their flaws, and I really hope you can read them and enjoy them too. I think the best thing about this era, the Sith Imperial War and the ensuing conflicts too, is the fact that literally everything is here. The Legacy era uniquely feels like a true culmination of all things that Star Wars had been in the expanded universe up to that point in the mid-2000s. For the first time, the Sith are all over, and they reign. The Empire is so present that there are two of them, one Sith and one not. The new Jedi Order, and later its survivors, are at the forefront of the conflict and play a huge role in it, especially its inception, as a lot more of them survived than in the original or sadly sequel trilogies. The rebellion is reborn through Gar Stazi's Galactic Alliance remnant, feeling as cool as ever with some great new designs. Rogue Squadron's even there too, flying the silly new Crossfire against the Sith and Empire. Mandalorians are even around, aligned with both sides and causing the exact chaos that you'd expect. But more importantly, to me than anything else, the Yuuzhan Vong's presence and their impact on the galaxy are undeniable, and the events of the New Jedi Order books feel like the absolute world-building foundation for this era, while the Vong also play big roles in this story themselves. And I really respect that. The Legacy era crafts a whole new status quo that only exists because of previous media, and that's really cool. The underworld side of things wasn't really discussed here as well, but in the Legacy comics, particularly in the vicinity of Cade, Jiraiya, and Delia, the underworld is so present, and it's done in such a fun and entertaining way. The way this world building is communicated, too, is pretty impressive. Legacy dives right in, not giving you too much time to know what's going on. Truly Star Wars in its DNA, it begins in media res, in the middle of the action, or should I say the end. The first scene in the entire series is at the very end of the Sith Imperial War. We find out about the war's impact on the galaxy as the series goes on, learning more and more over years, and not really diving into its origin until much later on, as it pertains to characters throughout the quote-unquote present-day storyline. It's really fascinating to me. But is it cheap to say that Star Wars Legacy and its surrounding lore are great because it has a lot of things that I love in it? It really does feel like it's chock full of so much that I recognize and adore from other stories. I don't think it's cheap. I think the difference is that it's done remarkably well here, and with intention. The political maneuvering and Imperial Sith-centric chaos was a huge thing to communicate in comics alone, and I respect Ostrander and Duursema so much for deciding to create such a complex and interesting story using elements from stories many of which they didn't even create. Now, I do feel like this era deserved a few novels, to say the least. It respects the expanded universe so much and feels so in line with it, even with decisions in it I didn't like. All while, of course, not being perfect. But all of that, doesn't that make it so inherently Star Wars? No, I don't agree with all the choices made in Legacy. I think a lot of them are actually kinda bad. But isn't that like so much of Star Wars? And what they do in Legacy is take what I consider to be bad choices, like a Solo ancestor being the new Emperor.
I mean, come on guys, they're still fascists.
And making them into a really good story. It's kinda like the opposite of what folks say about the sequels in YouTube comment sections. In a lot of ways, Legacy is conceptually bad, but the execution is so good that I forgive it, and I think you should too. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. My reading recommendation is, of course, Star Wars Legacy by John Ostrander and Jan Duursema. I don't think I need to pitch it any more than I just did, but I really think this series is kind of a rite of passage amongst Legends fans. I didn't mention them, but it has a lot of very 2000s cringy grimdark elements, but I can't help but simply smile and look back at the halcyon days where they could make Luke Skywalker's descendant, and the main character a greasy drug addict in a trench coat, and frustratingly the heir to Leia and Han, the Emperor.